Jack left me out in the suburbs with a fever, just to accompany his first love to see the sea. He taught me independence over 6 years. But he told his first love that she deserved to be cherished by the whole world. So, I really didn't need him anymore. Excitedly over the phone, Linda shouted, "Jack, can you hear the sound of the waves?" Jack's face changed dramatically, and he slammed on the brakes. "Linda, where are you?" Linda chuckled lightly. I was originally in a bad mood, but I felt a long-lost sense of peace when I came to the seaside. "Jack, the sea at night is so dark. I'm a little scared, but I feel grounded with my feet in the sand. The sea water is cool. I'm a bit cold." "Cold? How about I take you out to eat? That restaurant you said was delicious." Jack's voice was steady, but his hand holding the phone was shaking. Finally, he found Linda's blinking red dot on the map. He wanted to turn the car around, but I grabbed his hand. Jack remembered I was still in the car. Because of my obstruction, his face looked a bit unpleasant, and his gaze instinctively turned fierce. I helplessly smiled and muted the call screen. "Let me get out of the car first. I need to go to the hospital." I had a fever, 38.9 degrees. We left the friend gathering early to take me to the hospital. But one call from Linda made Jack forget my existence. Jack was in a dilemma. "Mary, Linda." I knew what Jack wanted to say. It was simply that Linda was in a more urgent situation. She needed him more. And I was just sick, not a child. Can't I handle it myself? Before he could finish his sentence, I nodded understandingly. "I get it. You should go find her. I'll go to the hospital myself." I got out of the car. I watched the car sit silently in place for 5 seconds, then the car turned around and sped away. Linda was Jack's first love. In college, in order to impress her, Jack, who was allergic to mangoes, forced himself to eat a whole box. But in the end, Linda abandoned him for a better choice. This left Jack feeling low and worthless for a while. I didn't redeem him. When I met him, he had already moved on from the pain of heartbreak. He was confident, mature, stable, and introverted. He had been a mentor in my life, shaping a better version of myself. It just wasn't in the way I wanted. Linda appeared suddenly 2 years ago. The so-called better choice she made not only cheated on her but also abused her. Linda sank into depression, severe depression. Jack was her therapist. He said he had long let go and now Linda was just a patient to him. Initially, this was true. Until Linda stopped paying. And until that night when Jack tenderly said to her, "You deserve to be cherished by the whole world." Today is a friend's birthday party for Jack. To have a good time, he found a farm in the outskirts. The environment was indeed nice, and there were plenty of fun activities. It's just that the location was too remote, and after 10 minutes, no one had accepted the taxi request on the app. I also couldn't stand anymore due to the fever. I crouched by the roadside, hesitating whether to call 911. Suddenly, a car drove over in the distance. "Mary, what are you doing here?" I squinted to recognize him. It seemed to be one of Jack's childhood friends. "George?" He got out of the car and helped me up. "What's wrong with you?" "Where's Jack?" I didn't intend to expose Jack's actions to everyone. I just prayed, "Could you take me to the hospital? I might not hold up much longer." When I say I might not hold up, I wasn't lying. As soon as I got in the car, I felt dizzy and closed my eyes. In a daze, I heard George making a call to Jack. He said, "Even if you have something urgent, even if Linda is about to jump into the sea and commit suicide the next second, you could have called us and one of us would have taken your wife to the hospital. If I hadn't left suddenly, she could have collapsed on the roadside and no one would have cared. She's not a child." Of course, she's not a child. But did you forget we're in the suburbs? Can she conjure up a car? Jack, you're such an animal. Although Jack's actions didn't have much impact on me, hearing someone speak up for me made me couldn't help but smile. Maybe because I was feeling relaxed, I fell asleep directly in the second half of the journey. When I woke up again, It was late at night. There were no messages or missed calls from Jack on my phone. Instead, George sent me a text message. "It's me, George. I had to leave early. I've arranged for a caretaker for you. When you wake up, please reply." So, I replied to him, "I'm awake, I'm fine, thank you." Thinking about it, I added, "Let's have a meal when you have time." I left the hospital the next morning after receiving 4 fluids. I took a day off from work and went directly to my friend's law firm. I was received by his subordinate, who handed me the divorce agreement and said, "If you need to file a lawsuit, you can contact me at any time." I thought it shouldn't be necessary, but I nodded and thanked him. When I got home, Jack wasn't there. Judging by the decorations at home, he hadn't returned all night. I didn't call him, took out my suitcase, and started packing. My stuff in the house had been decreasing. Only 3 pairs of shoes left in the shoe cabinet, and clothes in the wardrobe were from this season. I had already emptied the study. Last week, I moved the computer and files to the new house. As for other items, instead of the hassle of moving them, their best destination was disposal. I made 8 trips back and forth to get rid of everything. Only the suitcase stood upright in the living room, waiting for Jack. He arrived around 6 o'clock. When he saw the suitcase, he paused. "Are you going on a business trip?" he asked. "No, I'm moving out," I said, showing him the divorce agreement. "Let's get divorced." Jack paused for a few seconds, then rudely pushed me away. "Don't make a scene. I haven't slept all night, and I'm tired enough." I tried to keep my tone calm. "I'm not making a scene. Take a look. If there's anything you're not happy with, we can discuss it." "Are you serious?" "Yes," I replied. Jack sneered. "Mary, are you threatening me? A mature adult shouldn't do such things. Divorce? Running away from home? You're not a child anymore." I had heard such words too many times. Initially self-blaming, then angry, now I remained calm. I insisted on handing him the divorce agreement. "Take a look. If everything's okay, sign at the back." "Mary, enough." Jack growled lowly. "If you continue like this, I might take it seriously." I silently locked eyes with him. Ultimately, he forcefully looked away. Snatching the divorce agreement from my hand, he signed his name at the end without even looking at it. He sternly told me to leave. But I reminded him, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, we meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau. We met through a blind date. I had just turned 20 and hadn't graduated from college yet. I went there just for fun. Jack was a standout in my eyes. I couldn't help but exclaim, "Are all blind dates in the market of such high quality now?" Jack chuckled. We understood that neither of us had that intention. So after exchanging a few pleasantries and phone numbers, we went our separate ways. I called Jack 3 months later. Because he was a psychologist. "Jack, I wanted to ask you, what does it mean if I hear my toothbrush talking to me?" Jack replied, "It means you need to see me." That day, I underwent many tests and evaluations, with Jack leading the way. Later, he told me, "You're sick, you need to take medication." But I didn't feel sick. Jack lightly chuckled, "Take the medication, and you'll feel it." I relied heavily on Jack during that time. He was patient, gentle, with a smile, telling me, "It's okay, a minor ailment, I can cure it." It took him a year to cure me, and it took me half a year to win him over. And now, after 6 years of dating and marriage, we were on the verge of parting ways before reaching the 7-year itch. But fortunately, I had come to terms with it. I took a photo of the divorce agreement and posted a social media update. The first person who saw it was my mom. The phone calls were coming one after another, and messages kept pouring in. I glanced at them briefly, and they were either insulting or shameless. To avoid a heart attack, I immediately blocked her. The world was quiet again. The next second, Susan called. She was my best friend and the first person to know about my impending divorce. She said, I know you really want a divorce, but isn't it a bit too early to celebrate now? I smiled. It's not a celebration, I posted it for Jack to see. What do you mean? He might think I'm just mad. If I don't push him a little, he won't show up for tomorrow's divorce. Jack was 6 years older than me. My mom once said a 6-year age gap between a couple was not good, it's unlucky. But Jack's conditions were too good, completely shattering superstitions, making my mom think I had accumulated good karma in my past life. Because of this 6-year gap, Jack always treated me like a child. When he was good to me, it was like caring for a child. When he was not, it was like scolding a child. But the one phrase he always said was, "You're not a child anymore." My post had an impact. The next morning, when I was getting ready to finalize the divorce, Jack was already there. But he wasn't alone, Linda was with him. She looked at me with a hint of helplessness. "I heard from Jack that you two are getting a divorce." I was shocked. "Mary, you can't be so impulsive. If it's because of what happened the other night, I apologize to you, okay?" She used a tone of soothing a child, but her eyes couldn't hide the provocation. I curved my lips, then apologize. "What? Apologize? Weren't you asking for an apology?" Linda was taken aback. But she reacted quickly. She grabbed Jack's wrist. "It looks like Mary is really angry. Jack, please help me say something." Jack, with a cold face, "Is she a child? Does she still need to be coaxed?" "Jack, don't be like this. Didn't you promise me that you would talk to Mary nicely?" I interrupted her. "Linda, I'm curious, are we very close?" Linda's face turned pale. Jack let out a low sigh. "Mary, what happened to your manners?" I was getting annoyed. "If I remember correctly, our purpose today is to get a divorce, right? So Jack, are you just delaying the time?" Jack's face darkened. We entered the office one after the other. After completing the divorce registration, the staff reminded us to come back for the relevant documents in a month. Jack asked me, "When are you going to pick up your stuff?" I looked at him in surprise. "Haven't you noticed?" "Noticed what?" "There is no longer anything of mine in that house." Actually, it's understandable that Jack didn't notice. In the second year of our marriage, he suggested sleeping in separate rooms. He said, "Even in marriage, there should be independent space. That's how a lasting relationship between two people can be maintained." At that time, I truly trusted him. Even though I wanted more to share the same bed with him, I still agreed. From that time on, even though we had relations weekly, he would get up and leave after it was over. A few times, I grabbed him and asked if he could stay with me. He always looked at me with an expression, as if looking at a naughty child. "Mary, we should keep our promises, can't say things and not do them." Later, one time, his friend came over to the house and accidentally found out about Jack sleeping in the guest room. He teased Jack, asking if I had driven him away. Jack said, "I suggested sleeping in separate rooms." "Why?" "She's too clingy, a bit annoying." When my mom came to find me, I wasn't surprised. I had already told her the address of the new house. Not out of motherly love, but because I knew her well. If she couldn't find where I lived, she would go to my workplace. If she couldn't find me at work, she would go find Jack. And the last person I wanted her to bother was Jack. During the time when I was sick, Jack analyzed my mom, her behavior, motives, and her true intentions. My mom was transparent in front of Jack. Her so-called cleverness, he could see right through it. And Jack's smile-like expression after seeing through her, made me uncomfortable. "Is Jack divorcing you? Did you do something to make him angry? Why do you make things so troublesome? How can you post these things on social media? Do you have no shame? I've told you, quickly have a child, you're almost 30, still haven't had any children, why are you so useless? Why is my life so unlucky? Every time I go out, people say you're sick and can't have children, can't you give me some face? I can't eat enough and sleep well every day now. I don't care, you go talk to Jack properly, if you dare to divorce him, I won't recognize you as my daughter. I've heard these typical words countless times. They no longer evoke negative emotions in me. But I couldn't help but ask her, "You don't care why we are getting divorced?" "Why? What why? If you can't even keep your man, what's to talk about why?" "Mary, let me tell you, if you dare to divorce, don't call me mom again." I went along, "Okay, auntie." My mom stood dazed for a few seconds, then screamed, "Mary." She looked like she was having a heart attack from being provoked by me. "You can't stand to see me happy, can you? Do you have to make me angry? What did I do to wrong you? You want to kill me?" I looked at the hysterical, roaring woman in front of me. She didn't have a moral compass. She didn't know what should be done and what shouldn't be done, as if divorce had violated a moral code. But it was her who, when my boss wanted to take advantage of me, demanded $50,000. It was for a summer job she found for me. A real estate development company, where the CEO was my late father's high school classmate. She asked me to go there to learn finance. I went. And that man I could call uncle, after getting drunk, trapped me in the car. He said, as long as I agreed, he would go book a room now and give me $5,000 a month. I was terrified. Shaking, I told my mom about it. She remained silent for a long time. $5,000 is too little, tell him $50,000, if he agrees to $50,000, you can say yes. At that moment, I was numb. I numbly resigned, numbly went back to school. But she didn't let me off. She forced me to go back to that company, saying if I didn't hand over my work properly, how could she face that person in the future? That person who wanted to take advantage of me. And it was around that time that, due to severe depression, I became Jack's patient. I grabbed a kitchen knife and threw it in front of my mom. She shrank her neck, instantly silenced. "What are you doing?" I said, "It's up to you, whether you want to commit suicide or stab me. As for the marriage, it's already settled." Deadly silence. My mom looked at me with a hint of fear. "Using a knife is too ugly." I dragged her to the window. "How about we jump down together? Since you don't want to live, I'll save you a life." My mom ran away in panic. At the doorway, she said fiercely, "If you want to die, die on your own, don't involve me." Finally, the world was quiet. I lay down on the floor, mind blank, and fell asleep just like that. I was woken up by Jack's phone call. He asked me, "What should we do with the bags and jewelry in that glass display cabinet of yours?" I paused for a moment before realizing what he was saying. "All the stuff you sent, you can have it back now." Jack said coldly, "Once something is given, it's not meant to be taken back. If you don't want it, then just throw it away." After that, I hung up the phone. I was considering blocking Jack, but then I remembered we still needed to be in contact for the divorce proceedings. I thought, knowing Jack's nature, once he faces resistance from me, he won't take any initiative again. But to my surprise, on the fourth day, he called me again. At that time, I was out having dinner with George. George seemed aloof at first glance, but he turned out to be quite gentle when we interacted. His gentleness was different from Jack's. Jack seemed warm on the surface, but cold inside, while George exuded a depth that comes with time. I expressed my gratitude to him. He asked about my health and then we talked about our respective jobs. When he heard that I now worked at a tax firm, he was surprised. I chuckled and said, "I passed the CPA exam 2 years ago and switched jobs." George nodded and remarked, "Impressive. It's Jack's loss." I lowered my gaze. He probably still didn't know about my job change. In Jack's eyes, I was always deemed as worthless. When I mentioned wanting to pursue the CPA, his response was, "Don't waste your time on things beyond your capability." George wasn't a gossip, so that topic quickly passed. We chatted a bit more and then ended the dinner. As we were leaving the restaurant, Jack called. He asked, "Where's the body wash at home?" I kept silent. Suddenly, Linda's voice came from the background. "Forget it. Why did you even call Mary? Now she's misunderstood. I'm not taking a shower. I chuckled softly. The body wash is on the bottom shelf of the cabinet, and the bathrobe is on the top. Have fun. Wait. Jack's voice sounded urgent. Don't jump to conclusions. Linda and I were dining nearby, and the waiter accidentally spilled soup on her. I smiled lightly. You don't need to explain to me. George caught me as I almost tripped. He said, be careful. Jack fell silent. After a few seconds, he growled softly, who are you with? Confusedly, I furrowed my brows. We are divorced. George said, if you want, I can go and explain to Jack. I looked at him. Don't you believe that I truly want a divorce from him? George stared at me for a long moment. Finally, he said, I believe you. I smiled faintly, thank you. I thought I had made it clear enough. Jack, however, began bombarding me with calls. He even found my house. When George dropped me off at the neighborhood entrance, Jack rushed out of the car and threw a punch at George's face. I treated you like a brother, and you tried to seduce my wife. George endured the hit. Jack was about to throw another punch, but George restrained him. He said, that's enough. I ran over and pushed Jack away. What's gotten into you? Jack looked at me in disbelief. You're protecting him. I gritted my teeth. Are you out of your mind? Linda arrived late and grabbed Jack's hand, looking disapprovingly at me. Mary, you're being unreasonable. Even if you're upset, you shouldn't meddle with Jack and George's brotherhood. George smirked coldly. Linda. Do I know you well? Linda turned pale. George, I know you don't like me. If you know I dislike you, then don't speak. Enough. Jack always instinctively defended Linda. He stepped in front of Linda and glared coldly at George. Since when did you two start? I sighed impatiently. Jack, you see everything as dirty just because you are dirty. Linda interjected, but you got out of George's car. The passenger seat is only for girlfriends, right? I tilted my head at her. So, you knew. Linda looked aggrieved. I get carsick. Everyone could see she was making a fuss and twisting the truth, except for Jack, who turned a blind eye. I looked at Jack, feeling emotionally drained. What's your intention? Why can't you just leave me alone? Do I deserve to be tormented by you? Jack looked perplexed, tormented. You think I'm tormenting you? I said flatly, how did you know where I live? Ask my mom, right? You know her better than I do. You know that whenever you reach out to her, she thinks there's still hope between us. She'll come and pester me again and again. But you don't care, because how I handle my relationship with my mom is my business, not yours. That's directly from Jack. It's your mom, you should learn to manage your relationship with her yourself, instead of asking me each time. Otherwise, what was the point of all the therapy I've given you over the years? But her? I pointed at Linda. You can handle everything for her. How she interacts with friends, family, all directed by you. Why is that? Because in your eyes, Jack, Linda deserves all the love in the world, while I'm left to handle everything on my own. I can handle it. Jack, you've taught me to stand against the world, so I don't need you anymore. Because of Jack and Linda, George was inexplicably brought back to my home. But he didn't come inside. Just as we stood at the doorstep, he said to me, rest well, good night. I felt a bit sorry towards him. But I was too tired, physically and emotionally exhausted, lacking even the strength to speak. All I could manage was to nod and watch him leave. Jack wanted to talk to me. I agreed. Our next meeting was at his studio, as I requested. I hoped our conversation would be more rational this time. But Jack remained aloof and condescending. He said, I was wrong this time. I shouldn't have left you to find Linda. But Linda was in a critical situation at the time, and I was afraid she might do something reckless. I can't just stand idly by for a human life. She's my patient, you should understand. But I assure you, I'll handle our relationship properly. I pondered for a moment. It must have been about half a year ago, when Linda was rear-ended and called you. You had been up all night the previous night, but you still rushed over urgently when Linda called. Later, you explained to me that Linda had no one else to turn to except you. Jack frowned. What do you want to say? I want to ask you, if I rear-end someone, would you come with me? Of course, I said, and Jack stopped. He must have remembered what happened a month ago. The car broke down halfway, due to an aging frozen liquid pipe bursting. That day, my car was in for servicing, so I was driving his car, and naturally, I wanted to ask him how to handle it. He said, if attacked, call the police, if sick, call the ambulance, if the car has an issue, contact the repair shop. Mary, this is common sense. Jack took off his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose irritably. Mary, let's be reasonable. The reason I said that day is that we had a fight the night before. I nodded. Yes, we fought. So, as long as I don't admit I'm wrong or lower my head, you'll have to punish me in every way. Shouldn't you admit when you've done something wrong? I stood up abruptly. The worst mistake I've ever made in my life is marrying you. Jack grabbed my arm. What do you want? I looked at him coldly. I want you not to go back on your word when the month is up. The boldest thing I've ever done in my life is to pursue Jack. He helped me when I was most helpless. To the point where I felt I couldn't live without him. Days without seeing Jack made me visibly haggard. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just knew I wanted to be with him. At that time, I was truly in love. I clung to him, was jealous and suspicious. All of which Jack disliked. So he gradually broke me down, then remolded me. Days passed without Jack looking for me. I went on 2 business trips. When I returned, the security guard told me my mother had tried to contact me 3 times, but they had stopped her each time. Linda somehow got my phone number and messaged me, accusing me, because of you, Jack and George have completely fallen out. Are you happy now? I didn't want to engage, but I still called George. If you need it, I can explain to Jack. George replied, do you need it? No, you don't. I don't need it either. I fell silent. George asked, back from your trip? How did you know? He said, I went to your office to find you. Anything up? The finance officer at the subsidiary suddenly wants to resign, can't find a suitable replacement, and asked if you could do the accounts temporarily. I said, I'm quite expensive. George chuckled softly, then I'll try hard, should be able to afford it. I laughed too. Okay, I'll come by tomorrow for a detailed discussion. After hanging up, I realized I had misunderstood. Talking with George was pleasant. The subsidiary's operations were minimal, outsourcing the accounts was more cost-effective. After negotiating the price, we signed a contract. George checked the time on his wrist. I have a meeting below, so I won't keep you. I breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed I had misjudged. Sure, you're busy. Jack found me again on the 12th day, looking a bit disheveled. You've changed jobs, and you didn't even tell me. He frowned. What are you up to? Jack looked at me. Are you really asking for a divorce? What else? Why? Susan often said that in my relationship with Jack, even though he was 6 years older, I often indulged him. Whatever Jack wanted, I provided. Whatever Jack asked for, I did. So he became unrestrained, but also lost the ability to reflect. This is the last time. Let's talk. This time it was my turn to speak. I told Jack, I did tell you. I told you when I was studying for the exam, but you said I wouldn't pass. I told you when I changed jobs, but you didn't believe me and thought I was daydreaming. Even about buying a house, I didn't hide it from you. I've been renovating the new house since last year. I started moving things 2 months ago, everything under your nose. Why didn't you ask yourself why you couldn't see or hear it? Jack was bewildered. But you weren't like this before, he said. I sarcastically smiled. Thanks to you. My mother isn't a good life mentor. She never told me what to do or not to do. She never taught me morals and values. I figured it all out for myself through trial and error. That's why my values developed so late. At the beginning of my relationship with Jack, he would always shake his head in disappointment and exclaim, "How do you not know these things? How were you raised?" If it were me now hearing those words, I would definitely respond lightly. But back then, I truly felt ashamed and believed I was wrong. You told me a lot of truths and always demanded saint-like standards from me. I couldn't be weak, couldn't show negative emotions, couldn't ask you for help. Every word from my mouth had to be positive. I couldn't speak ill of others, couldn't complain about work, couldn't lack common sense, couldn't be content with pleasure. You were always blaming me, shattering my self-esteem inches at a time. Jack, do you know, I once thought of suicide because it was so painful. I just remember crying and crying, as if I had cried all my tears out for a lifetime. Jack's face turned white, his lips trembled, and he stuttered, "You're my wife, I just hope you can become better." Jack, as a psychologist, why don't you use your expertise to think about the things you did to me before? Is it considered PUA? I raised my hand to stop him. You think about it. You really need to think about it. Jack had shattered my self-esteem inch by inch. It was me who picked up the pieces one by one. Then I patched them together to become who I am today. On the 18th day, Jack showed up downstairs at my place. He called me. "I was wrong, I've changed. Will you forgive me? I won't contact Mary anymore. I won't do things you don't like. What do you need me to do to make it up to you? I'll give my life for it, okay?" He brought mangoes, a whole box. He awkwardly swallowed them bite by bite. His lips and cheeks started to swell, his exposed arms visibly broke out in a rash. He didn't stop. When the ambulance arrived, he was struggling to breathe. I didn't show up until he was dragged into the ambulance. The hopeful light in his eyes gradually dimmed. He closed his eyes and fainted. The first person who found me about this was Linda. The jealousy in her eyes was almost unbearable. Why? He clearly still loves me, that was improving his love for me. You two were already getting a divorce. Mary, what have you done? I looked at Linda and said, "Actually, I've always disliked you, but I didn't stop you from contacting Jack. You know why? Because your presence saved me. Because of Linda's presence, because of the way Jack looked at Linda with a lost expression, I suddenly realized that Jack was just a regular person. The second person who came to see me was my mom. She couldn't understand. Jack has gone this far, what else do you want? I also couldn't understand. Jack has always wanted me to cut off contact with you and asked me not to support you anymore. Do you still want me to be with him?" My mom's face changed color, and she ran off. The third person who came to see me was George. I thought it was about Jack too. However, he said, last-minute business trip. We rushed to the branch company overnight, did a handover with the finance team, who were about to go abroad, and sorted out the accounts. Due to time constraints, we had to stay there. George mysteriously said he would take me out to play. We arrived at a group of buildings. Then George told me, "This is the bar street. Here. Is it doing business well?" George sighed, "If I had heard you say this earlier, I wouldn't have invested." He regretted listening to hearsay from friends, and ended up in a loss-making deal. He didn't make any money, but he developed quite a skill in mixing drinks. I sat at the bar and watched him skillfully mix away. The only two customers in the bar approached and asked him to make a drink for them too. George smiled, pushed the drink he made in front of me. "Sorry, this one's just for you." That night, George became my personal bartender. I drank quite a lot, feeling tipsy, but not too drunk. The music in the bar was just right, the temperature was perfect, even the breeze coming in through the half-open window was just right. I was feeling pleasantly lightheaded. George asked me, "Are you having fun?" I nodded, "I am." Jack said that as long as I visited him in the hospital once, he wouldn't regret the divorce. I went. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was a very ugly smile. So these days, you haven't blocked me, you're willing to see me and talk to me, you're just afraid I'll regret it, right? I nodded. Then he asked, do you really hate me? I answered honestly, I did. I used to have a period of hating Jack. I hated meeting him. I hated that I loved him. But later, as I passed the CPA exam and changed jobs, I gradually became resigned. I told Jack, I understand myself, if I had a chance to start over, I would definitely make the same choice. The 20-year-old Mary needed Jack, not you, this Jack, but any Jack. Would I be better off with someone else? No. At that time, I was indeed terrible because I attached myself to others. But thankfully, you pushed me away. The process was painful, but fortunately, the result was what I wanted. Jack, I don't hate you anymore. Not because you're not hateful, but because I don't want to dwell on the past. But at the same time, I don't forgive you either. Now, I just want to leave. Jack followed through with his words. He didn't regret it. We smoothly obtained our divorce certificate. He asked me, can we still be friends in the future? I chuckled and replied, you're a psychologist, what do you think? I always remember something Jack once said, the past cannot be changed, but the future has endless possibilities. People always need to grow. It's okay to stumble and fall, even if you end up with bruises. Don't look back. Keep moving forward. After the divorce, I promptly blocked and deleted Jack. The only person related to him that I kept in touch with was George. In the 4th month after the divorce, George told me that Jack had been reported. Linda accused Jack of having ambiguous relationships with his patients. Although the allegations were false, Jack was not affected. Linda didn't let it go. She escalated by claiming that Jack had seduced her during her treatment. She provided chat records, photos of them hugging, and a video of them kissing during a couple's discount event. George seemed surprised by the detailed news. He scrambled to turn off his phone, and I calmly said, I already know. He fell silent. I wryly smiled and said, are you wondering why I knew everything, but didn't leave him right away? Before he could respond, I interjected, that was when I was still breaking free from my shackles. I needed to break free before I could escape. But I was too weak. I couldn't find the key, so I had to break my limbs. The sudden quietness around us was awkward. As I was thinking about breaking the silence, George patted my shoulder and said, you're already so strong. I worked for George for a year until he found a suitable replacement for me. During that year, we visited a branch office every month. On those days, he would mix me a drink, and his pay was generous. I treated him to many meals, and somehow, we became friends. Susan asked if he was trying to pursue me. I shook my head, I don't think so. Do you like him? She asked. I was puzzled, I never thought about it, I guess not. Susan wagged her head. I advise you not to make assumptions. Due to Linda's report, Jack was fired. With a tarnished record, he struggled to find a good job again. Yet, even at this stage, he refused to be with Linda. Linda finally gave up. I heard Jack started a business, but it didn't do well. My best friend asked if I was happy about it. I nodded, I'm quite happy. I provide financial support to my mom every month, but I don't see her much. She called me petty for holding grudges, but it didn't bother me. I'll still take care of her in her old age, but I've relinquished all my emotions toward her, whether love or hate. This state of mind makes me content. My birthday was at the end of the year. With few friends and reaching this age, I had no expectations for my birthday. But George invited me to dinner and celebrated my birthday. On the table were dishes I loved and a cake I liked. He gave me 2 gifts, one wishing me a happy birthday, and the other asking me to be his girlfriend. I agreed to be happy and to be his girlfriend. Susan was astonished, that's it. He didn't even woo first. I chuckled, I enjoy being with him. Adult love has our own tacit understanding. It doesn't need grand gestures or vows. When it's right, it's just right. But I couldn't help asking George, when did you start liking me? I wasn't under any delusion that he had secretly loved me for years, but I always felt he had been good to me from very early on. George thought for a moment and said, I didn't have a deep impression of you at first. I just thought you were Jack's petite, young wife who didn't talk much, but was very obedient. It wasn't until one time when I accompanied my mom to the temple. George wasn't keen on such activities, so he aimlessly wandered around the temple grounds. That's when he came across Mary. Mary was crying uncontrollably. George's first reaction was to avoid it. No one would want to be seen in such a mess by someone they knew. But he didn't leave in the end. Mary was crying too hard. The way she sobbed, curled up as if she had been wrung dry. George took a photo, thinking of sending it to Jack for him to deal with. But he didn't send it in the end. She was Jack's wife. Would she come to the temple to cry if she could find solace with Jack? George thought, never mind, don't do anything unnecessary. But he still did. He bought a pack of tissue and handed it to Mary. But he was at a loss for words. All he could say in the end was 3 words. Stop crying. Mary didn't remember who had handed her the tissue. But George engraved the despair in her eyes deeply in his heart. Initially, George didn't have any intentions. He was a committed bachelor. He didn't want to get married or be in a relationship, too much trouble. Plus, she was his friend's wife. But every time they met, he always paid more attention to her. Thinking to see if she was still so sad. Also thinking if he could do something to make her less sad. So at the KTV, he would casually direct the waiter to place the fruit platter near her. At the dining table, when the dish she liked was about to pass by, he would raise his hand to stop the turntable. But such opportunities were not many. George thought, it's okay, at least let her be happier in my presence. None of these meant anything. He would also bring food for the stray cats downstairs. No purpose, just incidental. Until they started talking about divorce. When Jack misunderstood them, he didn't explain. Firstly, in the past 2 years, he was becoming increasingly intolerant of some of Jack's behaviors. Secondly, he just wanted to express his stance. This girl was quite pitiful, he stood by this girl. He never thought he would be with Mary. He was a committed bachelor. Until his friend pointed out to him, are you playing a new kind of secret admiration? It took George 2 days to realize the reality. He took a deep breath. I kind of want to get married, what's going on? George and Mary got married in their 2nd year of dating. Jack also came. George kept him outside. Don't let her be upset. Jack scolded George for being hypocritical, saying he had plotted for a long time, saying he had ill intentions, saying they had already hooked up. George sighed, if it weren't for fear of wrinkling my suit, I really want to punch you. Halfway there, he turned back, telling Jack, really no, don't insult her. Making it seem like she was cheating in the marriage. That was not acceptable. Mary was very innocent. Mary was the one being bullied. After marriage, George and Mary always lived in their own world. George didn't want children. After being a committed bachelor, he found himself wanting to be child-free. His mom said he always acts on his thoughts. But she didn't pressure him. After all, he was willing to get married. However, George was nervous. He didn't want to hide it from Mary, but also afraid she wouldn't accept it. Mary, after listening, just nodded, perfect. I don't want to have kids either. In fact, Mary was also hesitating on how to tell George. Getting married to someone but not having children, that's not fair. But she didn't have the confidence to be a good mother. Her first half of life was too messed up. It was fortunate if she could heal herself in the second half of life. A life's proposition is too weighty. If she can't give a satisfactory answer, she'd rather not answer. But luckily, the two of them actually reached an agreement. The only one who frowned upon this was Susan. Do you believe him? He used to be a committed bachelor. If one day he decided he wanted kids, what would you do? Men can have kids at any age. Mary was calm about this. You are looking at it the wrong way. The issue here is I don't want to have kids, and he also doesn't want to, so we agree and got married. To want or not to have kids is his decision, not wanting to have kids is my stance. If we can agree, we stay together, if not, we part ways. It's that simple. But, isn't it sad? Mary lifted her head from the report. Just because you're afraid of getting hurt and don't want to be sad, you won't start. I can't be cautious for a lifetime. Hearing these words, George felt quite happy. That girl who sobbed loudly, that girl who was so sad, seemed like she had grown up. No, she had been growing up all along. No one could defeat her.